"Your constant attention is driving me crazy," my girlfriend said, then panicked when I withdrew completely and ended our plans. Those words hit me like a physical blow, especially since they came completely out of nowhere on what I thought was going to be a normal Sunday evening. I'm Derek, 29, investment banker making decent money in the city, and for 3 years I thought I'd been building something real with Melissa, a pediatric nurse who worked grueling 12-hour shifts at the children's hospital. I genuinely believed we were on the same page about our future. We'd been house hunting in some really nice neighborhoods, looking at engagement rings online together, talking about wedding venues her sister had recommended. The bomb dropped the moment she walked through the door after her girls' weekend in Miami with her friend Kennedy. I was making dinner, actually excited to hear about her trip and show her the mortgage pre-approval letter that had come while she was gone. "We need to talk," she said, dropping her bags with this weird energy I'd never seen before. I turned off the stove, thinking maybe something bad had happened during her trip, but instead she launched into this speech about how my obsessive behavior was suffocating her. I'm talking about things like bringing her lunch during her shifts because I knew the hospital cafeteria food was terrible, remembering when she had difficult cases in the NICU and needed extra emotional support, or planning surprise date nights after her particularly brutal weeks. "Derek, it's too much," she said, pacing around our living room like she was trapped. "The way you remember every detail about my work schedule, how you just show up with coffee when I'm stressed, it feels controlling and obsessive." I sat there completely stunned because these were the exact things she used to tell her friends made her feel so loved and supported. Her coworkers had even commented on how thoughtful I was, how lucky she was to have someone who actually paid attention. "I don't understand," I said. "Last month you told your sister I was the most caring boyfriend you'd ever had." "That was before I realized how unhealthy it was," she shot back. "Kennedy helped me see that normal relationships don't work this way. You're supposed to give each other space to breathe, to exist as individuals." Kennedy, the recently divorced real estate agent who'd been through 3 marriages and seemed to take pride in her cynicism about men. I should have known her influence was behind this sudden personality change. "What exactly do you want me to change?" I asked, trying to understand what boundaries she needed. But instead of giving me specific, reasonable requests, she became defensive and evasive. "See? You're interrogating my feelings right now," she accused. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't just accept what I'm saying without analyzing it to death." The conversation spiraled from there, with her accusing me of making her feel guilty for wanting independence, while I sat there trying to figure out when caring about someone's well-being became a character defect that needed to be fixed. I decided to take Melissa at her word and give her exactly what she'd asked for: complete emotional distance. The next morning, I didn't bring her coffee before her early shift like I had every single day for the past 2 years. I didn't text her good luck messages before difficult procedures or check in during her lunch breaks to see how her day was going. When she came home exhausted after dealing with sick children all day, I didn't offer foot rubs or ask about her patients or suggest we order from her favorite Thai place. I treated her like a polite roommate instead of the woman I'd been planning to propose to within the next 6 months. The expensive couple's retreat to Napa Valley that I'd been planning for 3 months? I called the resort and transferred our reservation to my investment firm's annual company retreat instead. My colleagues were thrilled about the upgrade to a luxury vineyard resort, and I figured if Melissa wanted space, she probably didn't want to spend a romantic weekend discussing our relationship anyway. When her car started making that grinding noise she'd been ignoring for weeks, and she mentioned it with that expectant look she used to get when she wanted me to handle something, I simply said, "That sounds frustrating. You should probably call a mechanic." The look of surprise on her face was almost comical, like she couldn't believe I wasn't immediately jumping into action to solve her problem. At first, she seemed genuinely relieved by the change. "This feels so much healthier," she announced after a few days, stretching on the couch like she'd been freed from some invisible cage. "I can actually breathe in this relationship now. Kennedy was right about how important it is to maintain your independence." But by the end of the first week, subtle complaints started creeping in. "You seem really distant lately," she mentioned while we were eating dinner in complete silence because I'd stopped asking about her day. "I'm giving you the space you requested," I replied calmly, not looking up from my plate. This isn't what I meant, she said, her voice taking on this frustrated edge. I meant emotional space, not complete indifference. I found that fascinating. What's the difference exactly? You're being deliberately obtuse, she snapped. Normal couples still communicate and show they care about each other. So I was supposed to care, but not too much. Show interest, but not obsessive interest. Support her, but not in ways that made her feel supported. The mental gymnastics required to navigate her contradictory expectations were becoming exhausting, so I decided to just stick with her original request for space. By the third week, Melissa's complaints had escalated into full accusations of emotional abuse. She cornered me one evening when I got home from work, blocking my path to the kitchen with this wild look in her eyes. We need to have a serious conversation about what you're doing to this relationship, she announced, like she was conducting some kind of intervention. What followed was a 2-hour marathon session where she simultaneously demanded that I care about her while insisting that my previous caring behaviors had been completely inappropriate and controlling. You're punishing me, she said, tears streaming down her face. You're using silent treatment and emotional withdrawal as weapons because I asked for healthy boundaries. I sat there listening to this elaborate victim narrative she'd constructed, where my decision to respect her stated wishes somehow made me the villain. Melissa, you literally told me my attention was driving you crazy and that I was being obsessive, I said calmly. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. But you're supposed to fight for us, she exploded, and there it was, the real expectation hidden beneath all her talk about independence and space. She hadn't wanted me to actually change my behavior, she'd wanted me to argue with her, to beg her to let me keep loving her the way I always had. This was some kind of test I'd apparently failed by taking her at face value instead of playing games. So you wanted me to ignore your clearly stated boundaries and continue behavior you'd labeled as controlling? I asked. That doesn't make sense. You're being deliberately obtuse again, she accused, which seemed to be her go-to response whenever I pointed out the logical contradictions in her position. Normal boyfriends would be concerned when their girlfriend says she needs space. They'd want to understand what's wrong and work together to fix it. The irony was staggering. When I tried to understand and work together, she'd called me obsessive. When I'd respected her request for space, I was emotionally abusive. There was literally no way to win this game because the rules kept changing based on what would make me wrong. Later that week, I discovered she'd been documenting my cold behavior in detail, texting screenshots to Kennedy with commentary about how I'd responded to various situations. Kennedy, of course, was validating every single complaint and encouraging Melissa to see herself as a victim of psychological manipulation. He's definitely punishing you for setting boundaries, Kennedy had written. Classic narcissistic behavior. Document everything. I found the text thread when Melissa left her phone on the counter while showering. Page after page of Kennedy coaching her on how to interpret my every action through the lens of victimhood, turning my respectful compliance with her wishes into evidence of malicious intent. The woman who destroyed 3 marriages was now systematically dismantling mine, and Melissa was eating up every word like gospel truth. The situation reached a new level of insanity when Melissa decided to involve my family. I came home from work one Thursday to find 17 missed calls from my mother, each voicemail more panicked than the last. Derek, honey, please call me back immediately, her voice was shaking. Melissa called me this afternoon and I'm so worried about you. When I called back, my mother was practically in tears. She told me you've been having some kind of psychological breakdown, Mom said. That you've become dangerously withdrawn and she's concerned about your mental state. She thinks you need professional help. I had to sit down. The audacity was breathtaking. Melissa had painted herself as the concerned girlfriend trying to save her boyfriend's sanity, when she was the one who demanded I change my entire personality and then got angry when I actually did it. Mom, let me explain what's really been happening, I said, and spent the next hour walking her through the entire situation. My mother listened in stunned silence as I described how Melissa had been positioning herself as my future wife while simultaneously claiming she needed freedom from our relationship. That girl has been talking about wedding venues with me for months, Mom said, her voice filled with disbelief. She showed me engagement ring photos on her phone just last week. What kind of person does that and then claims they need space? The family interference backfired spectacularly because now my parents understood exactly what kind of manipulation I was dealing with. But Melissa wasn't done yet. Over the weekend, she launched into full love-bombing mode, cooking elaborate meals I didn't ask for, wearing my favorite outfits, initiating physical intimacy, and generally acting like the girlfriend she'd been before Kennedy's toxic influence took hold. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me over dinner Saturday night, candles flickering between us like some romantic comedy scene. "Maybe I was too harsh about the attention thing. I do appreciate how much you care." But when I didn't immediately snap back into doting boyfriend mode, her mask started slipping. By Sunday evening, I could see flashes of genuine rage breaking through her performance whenever I maintained the emotional distance she'd originally demanded. The breaking point came when I overheard a phone conversation she was having with Kennedy while I was in the bathroom. "He's not responding the way you said he would," Melissa was whispering urgently. "I've been doing everything, cooking, dressing up, being affectionate, and he's still acting cold." Kennedy's voice was loud enough that I could hear her response through the speaker. "Then you need to escalate. Make him think he's losing you completely. Men like Derek only respond to the threat of abandonment." I stood there in my own hallway, listening to them strategize about how to psychologically manipulate me back into compliance, and finally understood that this had never been about healthy boundaries or independence. This was psychological warfare, and I was the target. The next day, I did some digging into Kennedy's background and discovered the extent of her toxic influence on every relationship she touched. Through mutual connections and some careful social media research, I learned that Kennedy had been married and divorced 3 times, each marriage ending because of her own infidelity and manipulative behavior. Her philosophy seemed to be that any man who treated a woman well was secretly controlling and needed to be tested until he either became abusive or walked away. She'd been systematically poisoning Melissa's mind for months, convincing her that my genuine care and attention were actually sophisticated manipulation tactics designed to control her. During our next confrontation, I confronted Melissa directly about Kennedy's influence, and she finally broke down and admitted the truth. "Kennedy said that men who are too attentive in the beginning are always hiding something," she sobbed. "She told me that truly devoted men will chase and beg when you push them away, and the fact that you just accepted my request for space proved you didn't really care enough to fight for me." The psychological manipulation was even more elaborate than I'd realized. Kennedy had convinced Melissa to create artificial problems and conflicts to test my reactions, turning our entire relationship into a series of experiments designed to prove I was either controlling or uncaring. "She told me to pay attention to how you responded when I pulled away," Melissa continued, tears streaming down her face. "She said if you really loved me, you'd refuse to accept the boundaries and prove that you couldn't live without me." So my respectful response to her stated needs had been interpreted as evidence that I didn't love her enough. I was supposed to ignore her boundaries, become desperate and clingy, and essentially prove Kennedy's point about controlling men. It was a perfect catch-22 designed by someone who seemed to take pleasure in destroying functional relationships. Kennedy said she was protecting me from getting too comfortable with someone who would eventually reveal his true nature, Melissa whispered. "She kept asking me what I'd do if you turned out to be like her second husband, who seemed perfect until they got married and then became possessive and jealous." I realized that Kennedy had been projecting her own terrible experiences onto our healthy relationship, convincing Melissa that my consistency and reliability were red flags rather than green ones. When Melissa attempted to use physical intimacy as another manipulation tactic, trying to seduce me back into our old dynamic, I maintained my boundaries and told her we needed to have complete honesty before we could even think about physical reconnection. Her breakdown was immediate and genuine, probably the first real emotion I'd seen from her in weeks, as she realized that all of Kennedy's tactics had backfired spectacularly and she was losing the best relationship she'd ever had to someone who collected failed marriages like trophies. I decided we needed to have one final, completely honest conversation about our relationship, and what Melissa revealed during that talk changed everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd been planning to marry. Sitting across from each other at our kitchen table, She finally broke down and admitted that the space request had never been about genuine need for independence. It had been based on pure fear. "I was terrified that your love was too good to be true," she said through tears, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every other guy I dated either lost interest after a few months or turned out to be using me for something. When you kept being consistently caring and thoughtful after 3 years, I started waiting for the other shoe to drop." The psychological manipulation hadn't been intentional at first, she explained. It started as her trying to protect herself from potential future heartbreak by creating distance before I could leave her first. But Kennedy's influence had turned those protective instincts into deliberate testing behaviors designed to make me prove my devotion in increasingly unreasonable ways. "Kennedy kept telling me that if you really loved me, you'd fight harder when I pushed you away," Melissa confessed. "She said the fact that you respected my boundaries so easily meant you were probably relieved to have an excuse to care less. She convinced me that true love means someone can't accept being pushed away." The twisted logic was breathtaking. I was supposed to become the controlling, boundary-crossing boyfriend Kennedy had predicted I'd reveal myself to be, thus proving both women right about men in general. My failure to become abusive or desperate was somehow evidence that I didn't love her enough. "I only truly wanted you when I thought I was losing you," she admitted, and there it was, the core truth that made continuing this relationship impossible. She didn't actually love me, she loved the security of having someone devoted to her, and she only valued that security when she thought it might disappear. "I know I can change," she pleaded desperately. "I'll cut contact with Kennedy completely. I'll go to therapy. I'll appreciate everything you do instead of taking it for granted. Please don't give up on us." But I realized that even her promises to change were based on fear of loss rather than genuine love or respect for me as a person. She'd spent months making me feel like my natural way of showing love was wrong, pathological, something that needed to be fixed or hidden. Even now, her desire to save our relationship wasn't because she valued who I was, but because she was terrified of being alone. Our entire relationship had been built on me constantly proving my worth while she held the power to judge whether my love was acceptable, and that dynamic was never going to produce the kind of partnership I actually wanted. I ended our relationship the next morning and asked Melissa to move out within the week, which led to her staying with Kennedy in what I knew would be a predictably toxic living situation. The irony of her moving in with the woman who'd destroyed our relationship wasn't lost on me, but I figured they deserved each other at that point. Within days, Melissa launched a full smear campaign through our mutual friends, painting me as an emotionally abusive partner who'd manipulated her into thinking she was crazy for wanting healthy boundaries. But the truth has a way of emerging, especially when you're dealing with someone as unstable as Kennedy. About 3 weeks after Melissa moved out, I got a text from our mutual friend Sarah saying that Melissa and Kennedy had gotten into a massive screaming match that ended with Melissa storming out and blocking Kennedy on all social media platforms. Apparently, Melissa had finally realized that Kennedy's advice had destroyed the best relationship of her life, and when she confronted her about it, Kennedy's response was characteristically callous. "I was trying to give you some self-respect," Kennedy had said. "If he really loved you, he would have fought harder." That was the moment Melissa understood she'd been manipulated by someone who took pleasure in sabotaging other people's happiness, but by then it was far too late to undo the damage. Meanwhile, I was having the time of my life on that Napa Valley retreat with my work colleagues, feeling genuine peace and freedom for the first time in months. The luxury vineyard resort was absolutely beautiful, and I found myself laughing and relaxing in ways I hadn't been able to do while constantly walking on eggshells around Melissa's ever-changing emotional needs. My coworkers kept commenting on how different I seemed, more confident and at ease, like I'd been carrying invisible weight that had finally been lifted. Melissa's final desperate attempts to reconcile came through increasingly pathetic text messages from new phone numbers and mutual friends who she'd enlisted to plead her case. "She says she's learned her lesson and knows what real love looks like now," Sarah told me over coffee. "She wants you to know that she'll never let anyone influence her against you again." But I was done being someone's learning experience, done proving my worth to someone who only valued me when she thought she was losing me, and definitely done with someone whose idea of personal growth required destroying our relationship first.